Now we will be starting our next session, Opportunities for Overseas Collaboration for Indian Institutions. Speakers for this session are Shri P. Sisodia, Joint Secretary, Higher Education, Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India. His Excellency Shahid Mohammad Abdali, Ambassador of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to India. His Excellency Rizali Wilmar, Indrakesuma, Ambassador to Indonesia to India. Lieutenant Boris, Minister of Republic of Slovenia. Robert O. Ferrer, First Secretary, Embassy of Philippines. Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of World Education Summit 2013, we extend a warm welcome to all our distinguished speakers and participants for this session, Opportunities for Overseas Collaboration for Indian Institutions. It's indeed an honor to have you all at this platform. So we extend a warm welcome to our session chair and moderator of the session, Mr. Mark Parkinson, Executive Director, Head of School, Kunskapsskolan Eduventures. Welcome, Mark. Now we'd like to welcome our esteemed speakers, His Excellency Shaida Mohammad Abdali, Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to India. Welcome, sir. His Excellency Rizali Wilmar, Indrakesuma, Ambassador to Indonesia to India. Welcome, sir. Mr. Robert O. Ferrer, First Secretary, Embassy of the Philippines. Now I would like to request Mark to kindly take over the session and start the proceedings.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. As a British educator, and in fact, not just educator, but ex-private banker, who chose to do what I do within education within India, but not within international schools, but actually within schools following Indian examination boards. So I've been with schools following both the ICSE and CBSE, but also along the way I've been involved with the International Baccalaureate in schools and Cambridge programs. So I've seen many aspects of international education. I've also spent 2 years turning around an international school in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And for the last 7 months, as a British person in India, who's now been here for nearly 15 years, I've been part of a collaboration that brings an education brand from Sweden into India for the first time. So I guess from a very personal aspect, I see enormous opportunities and benefits and synergies from international collaboration in the field of education. I think in a world where international understanding, international ability to work across boundaries and across borders, and to work in cross-curricular and cross-cultural ways, it becomes increasingly important that our education systems look to remove barriers and boundaries that often exist for purely superfluous reasons. There is something about the inspiration to me of looking towards a future that is increasingly reflective of people who see themselves first as citizens of a world and perhaps second as citizens of nations. I think such a world promises a great deal more harmony, despite what our newspapers may sometimes be telling us early in the morning. We do actually live in a world which perhaps currently sees less war and conflict than perhaps has been seen in the world at all in the last, certainly in the last 200 to 300 years. As I say, if you let the media sway you entirely, you would find that hard to believe, but I have seen data that backs that. And that augurs well, I think, and that is an encouragement for all of us that we are striving together towards a world where that international collaboration brings international understanding, which in turn brings international opportunities for harmony and a world within which people begin to understand that they will always have more that makes them similar than makes them different. Yes, I think it is true that in the field of education, when we collaborate internationally, it tests our ingenuity at times, it tests our flexibility, our ability to reflect and understand those nuances where what works in one country does need to be tweaked and refined in order to make it work in another country. But those things are normally peripheral, and I believe that we have the opportunity this afternoon for a very interesting and stimulating discussion with our esteemed panelists. So I'd like to start by inviting to speak His Excellency Shaida Mohammad Abdali, the Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Thank you, sir.
Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly honored to be by the invitation to address this premier summit on the value and importance of education. I would like to thank Digital Learning Magazine, the All India Council for Technical Education, the Elite Technomedia, and others, as well as the leaders that direct these important organizations for co-hosting this important summit. It gives us all an opportunity to exchange ideas, experiences, and knowledge on a sector of sustainable development which every country in our immediate region and beyond needs to invest in order to make our shrinking world a better and safer place for all humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, as we know from the experience of developing countries, most notably from the experience of India, investing in education is the single most effective means of reducing poverty. Indeed, education is more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. It is one of the most important investments any country can make in its people and its future. Please allow me to cite a few vital impacts that education can have on any society. Education gives people critical skills and tools to help them better provide for themselves and their children. Education helps people work better and can create opportunities for sustainable and viable economic growth now and into the future. Education helps fight the spread of HIV, AIDS, and other diseases, reduces mother and child mortality, and helps improve health. And education encourages transparency, good governance, stability, and help fight against graft and corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, just 12 years ago, Afghanistan was one of the most isolated countries in our region and the world over. Immediately after the fall of the communist regime in early 1990s, the education sector began crumbling in Afghanistan. In the years that followed, the Taliban denied half of our population, including girls and women, their basic human rights to education. Schools and universities gradually closed as they lacked faculty, a modern curriculum, and other basic teaching and learning materials and equipment for faculty and students. These unprecedented setbacks in the history of the education sector in Afghanistan led to one of the highest student absentee rates in the world. In effect, our massive losses in the education sector came to be called the mother of all tragedies, engulfing Afghanistan under the Taliban. Ladies and gentlemen, today we understand the quintessential value and importance of education in the long-term stabilization and development of our country. Our progressive constitution, after the fall of the Taliban, recognized education as one of the most basic human rights of all Afghan citizens. Since then, the government of Afghanistan has committed steady political and financial support to ensure adequate investment in the education sector. From 2007 to 2011, our recurrent budget for education had increased by an average of 32% each year. The planned budget for the 3 subsequent years has seen an average annual increase of 12%, or an increased budget of $157 million in total. Additionally, the international community has provided Afghanistan with ongoing on-budget and off-budget support to strengthen the education sector. International assistance has mostly focused on building primary and secondary schools across Afghanistan, providing Afghans with access to education for the first time in some parts of Afghanistan. As a result of our collective efforts, every day, nearly 10.5 million Afghans, 40% of them are girls, attend schools throughout our country. Of this, more than 130,000 students, 20% of them of girls, are busy studying at over 100 public and private higher education institutions across Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, NATO forces are withdrawing from Afghanistan as we increasingly take over international military and civilian aid programs to secure and rebuild our country. This transition process is currently underway and should be completed by the end of 2014. But for this process to succeed in the long term, it is important that more attention be placed on democracy and development. And the best way to do this is by investing in the education sector in order to ensure the irreversibility of the transition process. It is a universal fact that education constitutes the backbone of any peaceful and prosperous society. Without education and employment opportunities, the continued expansion of Afghanistan's youthful population will provide a fertile ground for organized crime and violent extremism to flourish, thereby endangering peace and security. And of course, without educated citizens, the values of democracy and liberty will not be institutionalized to ensure protection of the basic human rights of the Afghan people, particularly women who suffered the most under the Taliban. Today, in spite of 12 years' achievement in the education sector, the enemies of Afghanistan and regional stability often target our academic personnel and education facilities across Afghanistan. Terrorists who operate out of safe sanctuaries across Afghanistan, across the border, have burned down our schools, killed our teachers and students, and thrown acid on the face of innocent school children. These terrorists consider the education of Afghans as an existential threat to their misguided anti-Islamic ideology of hatred. Where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught the Muslim community to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. The terrorists and those who support them continue to twist the core tenets of Islam to fit their short-sighted geopolitical agenda against regional development and prosperity through education. Unfortunately, we have seen in our region that when modern education is not given a chance to provide opportunities for human progress and welfare, violence and chaos will naturally follow. For this widening trend to change course in the right direction, the countries of the region must stand firmly united against any force, be them state or non-state actors who deliberately undermine efforts aimed at education of regions promising youthful populations. Afghanistan is the primary victim of such anti-education designs with external roots, and we renew our call on India and all other regional cooperation mechanisms, particularly the SAARC, to address this grave threat to regional stability. Ladies and gentlemen, the people and government of Afghanistan are grateful to India for leading international education aid programs in our country. The focus of India's effective assistance on institutional capacity building through the education sector has paid off manifold. Most of Afghanistan's public and private institutions benefit from the Afghan capacity generated through Indian assistance. Currently, nearly 7,000 Afghans students are busy studying at universities and technical schools across India, preparing to return home armed with technical know-how and skills to drive the stabilization and development process of Afghanistan beyond the transition phase after 2014. In the years ahead, we only look forward to India's increased assistance in this sector, with a focus on technical skill development in Afghanistan. This is best achieved through re-establishment of a university-to-university collaboration between Afghanistan and India, as well as faculty and education and student exchange programs which formerly existed and were of immense help to Afghanistan. Educational cooperation through such sustainable mechanisms will go a long way in enabling our country to slowly rise with the rest of the region towards the vision of an economically and socially integrated region. Indeed, the realization of such a grand vision, which is the aspiration of the peoples of our region, will need bold political will and leadership in the region. And it will take time too, but now is the time for all stakeholders to act in the institutionalization of peace and democracy through education. Thank you once again for the opportunity to share with you my thoughts today. I wish you the very best today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for sharing the, I think, very inspiring journey of the impact that education can have in a part of the world that has seen suffering, has seen great difficulty, has seen challenges. It is, regrettably, and you've experienced it with your own country, sometimes the truth that when there is conflict, education can be a soft target. And education can be a target that can have an impact that seeks to undermine the spirit of the people. Because if you can undermine education, then you start to cause a population to question the impact of its future. And if people become uncertain about the future, then that impacts how they feel about the present. And unfortunately and regrettably, in situations of war, anything and everything is fair game. But I think what you've also shared with us is a very enlightening and inspiring vision of where things have now reached and where they have the potential to go in the future. And I expect that when we open the floor to questions later, there will be some questions about how perhaps organizations can play a part in that future. It is now my pleasure to welcome our second speaker, His Excellency Rizali Wilmar Indrakesuma, the Ambassador of Indonesia to India. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, or good evening rather. Session Chair, distinguished Session Chair, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Afghanistan, distinguished colleagues from foreign missions in New Delhi, distinguished participants of this meeting. First of all, I would like to express how grateful I feel to be able to be part of this event, of this occasion, and perhaps share some thoughts that hopefully would give some contributions to the event that is going on today and tomorrow. So I thank you, the organizers of this World Education Summit 2013, for inviting me and my colleagues. And hopefully, upon completing my presentation, follow-up could be made later on in the future. And what I'm going to present today would be very brief. I will attempt to be very brief and talk a little bit about the Indonesia-India higher education opportunities for collaboration, with the aim to present our collaboration opportunities, especially with the focus on higher education. Why higher education? Indonesia, as a nation and a country, is one of the largest country in the region, in Asia. It's got 240 million population. We have been independent since 1945, so we are about to enter our 7th decade of independence. We've gone through various turmoils, we've gone through various instances in our history, and we are proud to say that at this point we are doing pretty well economically. We are one of the fastest growing economy, and we keep increasing, we keep progressing in that field. We are also progressing in our bilateral relations, and in this case with India. Our bilateral relations with India is at the very top level at this point, after about 6 decades of diplomatic relations. The economic engagement is good, is excellent. We have a trade amounting to almost 20 billion US dollars. We are expecting investment also from India to Indonesia as well as from Indonesia to India in the billions as well. So it's only natural that when one sees Indonesia as a large country with 240 million, they would go to how does Indonesia educate their students, which brings us to especially on higher education. Now, if you look at the figures, this is a figure that does not at all represent Indonesia through any perspective of a country which has progressed, which has been independent for more than 60 years, a country that has 240 million population, a country that has progressed well economically. As you can see, the profile of our higher education in 2000, as recent as 2012, was as follows. We have 85 public, by public perhaps we mean state higher education institution, and 85 public higher education institution, and 2,235 private ones. And our gross enrollment ratio for higher education is currently 28%. Now our government is setting up new target of 30% for 2014, and therefore the need rises for more higher education institution in Indonesia, with the hope of improving access to the higher education through improvement of its availability and affordability. The plan so far by the government is to establish new institutions, 3 art and cultural institutes, as well as 2 institutes of technology, establishment of 20 community colleges, and increasing of the number of seats for higher education institutions, especially in remote and national border area. Now, perhaps this is where our collaboration and cooperation with friendly countries come into the picture. It is a known fact that India has really progressed. India has really advanced in the field of education. India has now become a destination for students, overseas students, to come and pursue their studies, further their studies here in India. So one of the objectives of the Indonesian government is also to encourage students from Indonesia to also pursue their studies, not only in the traditional or conventional countries such as those in Europe or in America or in Australia, which is nearer to Indonesia, but also to countries with a relatively similar standard, if not higher education, which is in India. So that is also one of our objectives in trying to really engage in the education field with India. And for that purpose, after a long and arduous negotiations by our 2 governments, an MOU on education cooperation was signed by our 2 governments in 2011, January 2011. That was when the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, visited New Delhi as a chief guest for the Republic Day in 2011. There were several MOUs being signed. 3 MOUs agreement were signed. One of them was MOU on education cooperation. And it is stipulated in that MOU several areas of cooperation, namely exchange of research materials, publication, educational literature, teaching aid, demonstration of material and information, organizing of training programs for non-formal education, organizing of joint research programs and publication, organizing of training programs for educational administrator and teaching staff, exchange of academic and other administrative staff, exchange of scholars, teachers, experts, and students, twinning arrangements between institutions of higher learning and sister school, facilitation of internship programs for vocational and technical education at secondary and tertiary level, and examination of the possibility of mutual recognition of educational qualifications. These are the areas that were agreed by our 2 governments, and hopefully it could be followed up not only by the state, by the government, but also with the assistance and the cooperation of the private sector as well. Now, this MOU is an addition to what has already been going on between our 2 countries. We are very happy that our cooperation in education sector have blossomed. The Indian government has provided several scholarships programs for Indonesia, including through the ICCR, the ITEC Colombo Plan, while the Indonesian also, to its limited capacity, has provided also scholarship for Indians including the Dharma Siswa, Art and Culture, and Non-Alignment Movement Scholarship. Exchange of lecturers have also started just recently between Indonesia and India. One example being an exchange of lecturers from the Gajah Mada University in Yogyakarta with the Rashtriya Sanskrit Vidyapeta and the University of Yogyakarta and JNU. There is also a research collaboration between University of Gajah Mada and University of Andalas in Sumatra, University of Mataram and Hyderabad University, as well as the training of lecturers on teaching material production and NCERT. Bahasa Indonesia course and research on linguistic, which has already been established, but has yet to really operate on a regular basis there, depending on the lecturers that will be coming from Indonesia. So all of these are proof that cooperation, collaboration is already there, and it has started. Indonesia has begun to realize the advantage of really working together with India in the field of education. However, more opportunities still lie ahead. There is this distance learning for community college education, curriculum and syllabus development, teaching materials, video conference, etc., lecturer and student exchange, research and scientific publication, as well as studies for double degree. And it is to that purpose that Indonesia, the government of Indonesia, after more than 50 years having its embassy here in New Delhi, has assigned an educational attaché as part of the embassy. I'm happy to introduce to you my colleague, Dr. Son Kuswandi, Professor Son Kuswandi, who has been here for 2 years or so. He is the one who is given the task, together with the embassy, to really see the opportunity of working with his Indian counterpart and seeing to it that this collaboration between India and Indonesia could really blossom and would eventually benefit not only the Indonesian younger generation, but to a certain degree also the Indian younger generation. Now, in conclusion, India and Indonesia as neighboring countries could share expertise. We have come to realize that through our experience from the past, and this will mutually benefit, especially for higher education. We've been trying from more than 10 years, we've been trying to encourage young people, young high school graduates or maybe university graduates to pursue further their studies also in India as an alternative to other places that I've mentioned. And hopefully with the addition of a special person at the embassy and the political will of both countries, both governments to really work together, hopefully the number of students, Indonesian students, which now amounts to the lower hundreds, maybe less than 200s all over India, 300s tops, hopefully will blossom just like other countries to the number of the thousands. That is one of the objective. That is also one of the tasks given to me as ambassador here in India, to really increase not only our cooperation in economical aspect, political aspect, but also in social, cultural aspect, and namely education. India is rich in experience and its technology for distance learning. One new era for Indonesia, which is distant learning. We have come to realize that India is also a country which has a rich experience in distance learning, We are also looking forward to learn more about distance learning from India, as well as share our experience, our own experience in distance learning. All in all, the idea of cooperation is really to expand educational access to our young generation, especially in remote and border areas of the countries. And hopefully, once this collaboration has already worked, I'm very sure that both, not only Indonesians, but Indians as well, would also benefit from that collaboration. And on that note, I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, sir, for that most informative and I think very thought-provoking exploration of the opportunities existing in relation to higher education collaboration between India and Indonesia. I think you set out very clearly for us where your own country has its targets for higher education enrollment and how collaboration can potentially play a major part in that. And also how the seeds for this have been sown through the MOU on Republic Day 2011. I was particularly interested to hear the references to research, to exchange and training collaboration for educators, an area which is particularly close to my heart in terms of, I think, a focus on quality in the education. It's not just about access to education, but access to quality education. And I think that was also highlighted in the things you talked about that are already happening. Whether it's you talking about your remote and border areas, or perhaps our colleague from Afghanistan talking about greenfield sites where education hasn't been there too much. I'm sure that when we come to discussion later, one of the things that can be in our minds is that those areas potentially are not inhibited by lots of legacy systems and lots of old stuff already being in place. And it should be possible for people to be inspired enough to say, if it's a greenfield site, let's create the best of what's new and innovative in 21st century. Let's not just go into those places and recreate old-style education from 30 and 40 and 50 years ago. Let's use the fact that it's a new, fresh space, and let's go in and do innovative, creative, imaginative 21st century things. So I think there's lots of scope there. I now have the pleasure to introduce our third guest, Mr. Robert O. Ferrer, the first Secretary of the Embassy of the Philippines.
Good evening. Hello, Mr. Chair. I wish to greet His Excellency the Ambassador of Afghanistan, the Ambassador of Indonesia, my colleagues in the Foreign Service, other countries, colleagues and guests. I'd like to just mention that it's an honor for me to be speaking alongside two distinguished ambassadors. I'd like to extend the greetings of my own ambassador, Benito Valeriano, for this summit, and it's an honor for us to be here.
You should be promoted very quickly.
Well, I can say, I prepared some notes. I can say that the building blocks for cooperation between nations, because the theme is possibilities for cooperation, involves a lot of hard work. As the former director for Central and South Asia division of my Ministry of External Affairs, I was involved in organizing a tour of the heads of Afghan technical and vocational schools in a productive tour of the Philippines, including Polytechnic University of the Philippines, University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and these are the building blocks for cooperation. But I'd also like to share, Mr. Chair, what has been happening between Philippines and India in terms of bilateral relations. India's rise to prominence, both economically and politically, augurs well for the region and for the Philippines. Now, both the Philippines and India have several avenues of cooperation that are in place, and many more will be opened up, including in education cooperation, and I will mention more details later. With the inaugural meeting of the Philippines-India Joint Commission on Bilateral Cooperation last March 2011 in New Delhi, the Philippines and India agreed to continue to hold regular policy consultations and security dialogue. And we have renamed our security dialogue as Strategic Dialogue. So India and Philippines are becoming closer together. There are three main working groups in our joint commission: the working group on tourism, the working group on agricultural cooperation, and the working group on trade and investment. The Philippines and India, both with strong, decades-long democratic traditions, are natural allies and partners. And our bilateral relations are on the cusp of being re-energized following more exchange of visits by our respective leaders. India's membership in the emerging economic superpowers, encapsulated, for example, in BRICS, or Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is cause for excitement and anticipation. Of course, the signing of the 4 agreements encompassing the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement last August 13, 2009 in Bangkok, and the subsequent negotiations for liberalizing trade in services and investment is even more exciting within ASEAN. For the Philippines, these developments bring the region, our region, ever closer together, where India's look east has met with an enthusiastic response from the Philippines. And within this context, we will see greater collaboration, including in education. India plays an important part in the Philippine experience. The Philippines is Asia's first republican democracy, 1898. India is the world's largest democracy. Now, both are therefore standard bearers for freedom and democracy in the region, and the Philippines and India are natural allies, not only because they have a shared common language, which is English. Both are Asian countries that are animated by vibrant democratic traditions based on republican ideals. So Asia's first democracy and Asia's largest democracy are therefore surely headed for closer ties. I will skip some of my other notes. ASEAN-India interaction has nowhere to go but up, building from strength to strength, from synergy to synergy. Clearly, it is an exciting time to be in India. It is also an exciting time for India to be part of the East Asian and ASEAN milieu. Today, in the 21st century, both the Philippines and India are as fervent in bringing the fruits of democracy won by their respective forefathers to each of their citizens. So education becomes very important. That is why both governments are focused on working very hard to achieve national development for their peoples. At a time when both the Philippines and India are basking in the good news about their nation's sustained and strong economic gains, Asia is leading the world in economic recovery. Today, ASEAN can rightly be considered a powerhouse in Asia. ASEAN spans over an area of 4.46 million square kilometers, 3% of the total land area of the planet, with a population of approximately 600 million people, 8.8% of the world population. And in 2010 to 2011, its combined nominal GDP had grown to US $1.8 trillion. If ASEAN were a single country, and our distinguished ambassador from Indonesia is here with us, it would rank as the 9th largest economy in the world, and the 3rd largest in Asia in terms of nominal GDP. So why is ASEAN important to India, indeed to Central and South Asia as well? ASEAN's aims include the acceleration of economic growth, social progress, cultural development among its members, the protection of the peace and stability of the region, and to provide opportunities for member countries to discuss differences peacefully Without these, there can be no cooperation on the ground, including education, energy, infrastructure, connectivity. So this has to be set first, and our founding fathers have done that for us. The Philippines and ASEAN are open to India and vice versa, Mr. Chair. ASEAN and East Asia, including India, is open for business. The ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement, Agreement in Trade in Services, there have been 2 previously held ASEAN-India business fairs and business conclaves, are only the beginning. Very soon, direct Manila-Mumbai flights will be in the offing. Right now, there are more than 80,000 Indians in the Philippines and about 3,000 Filipinos in India. I agree with the previous speaker that ASEAN and SAARC should look into cooperation in education as well. Indian investments, Mr. Chair, are welcome in my country, including in education. It was only in 1976 that the Philippines-India bilateral relations started to normalize from their Cold War stupor. When Mr. Aditya Birla, one of India's successful industrialists, met with then-President Ferdinand Marcos to explore possibilities of setting up joint ventures in the Philippines. Today, the Birlas operate a call center in the Philippines and a yarn mill. So today, many Indian companies from steel to IT-enabled service providers like Wipro have followed Birla's lead, and even Tata Motors. Bilateral trade between the Philippines and India, while officially pegged only at just over $1 billion, is ripe for expansion, with the balance of trade in the past 5 years being in India's favor. As for Filipinos in India, they are estimated to be 3,000 and are scattered all over the vast subcontinent. This, however, has not hindered the Filipino communities in such far-off places as Orissa, Kerala, and Goa, and those from New Delhi, the national capital region, and Punjab, to showcase Filipino values of pagkakaisa, unity, and pagtutulungan, the ability to help each other, and relations between India on the ground level are very active. The Philippines has been working with the government of India to allow free movement of more Filipino professionals to India. In this regard, the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Home Affairs of India have allowed Filipinos to avail of tourist visa on arrival facilities from Indian immigration offices in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata international airports. So these are building blocks. Therefore, more and more Filipino citizens are now visiting India and staying in India as executives and valued white-collar workers in multinational companies, such as those based in Gurgoan in south of New Delhi. This will hopefully bring more Filipino tourists to India in the same way that the embassy's initiatives on less restrictive visa procedures and visa on arrival entry requirements for Indians have pumped up the number of tour groups visiting the Philippines, including those in the education sector. According to the Department of Tourism, visitors from India to the Philippines in February 2013 registered at 4,136, Mr. Chair, or 18% higher than for the same period in 2012, which was 3,491. So it's, exchanges are going up. And I'm close to my conclusion. Other notable people-to-people exchanges are seen in the huge number of Indian alumni from the Asian Institute of Management in Makati City, in Metro Manila, plus the constant number of Indian student pilots who are enrolled in Philippine flying schools. When I was director of Central and South Asia Division, I counted more than 500 Indian student pilots, either renewing their licenses in the Philippines or studying to become pilots. And now they're flying for Indian carriers. Indians from the tribal northeast states such as Assam, Nagaland, Meghalaya, Tripura, Manipur, and Mizoram, find affinity with the tribal groups in northern Philippines, such as those from Abra, Benguet, Kalinga Apayao, and Cordillera Autonomous Region, with whom there is some cultural affinity. My ambassador, His Excellency Benito Valeriano, comes at a time of renewed interest in the dynamic Philippine-India bilateral relations. In partnership with all relevant stakeholders, the strategic impetus animating both countries would receive a boost in the months to come. And going beyond India, we have had experience in sharing our e-learning capabilities with the government of Bhutan in the past. In other parts of South Asia, from Nepal, for instance, more than 500 Nepalis are enrolled in Philippine medical schools. And mind you, these are happening even without formal MOUs. So on the ground, the reality has gone on ahead of our government. So we find that the government structures would need to catch up with what is happening among the peoples. So that's the reality. And I already mentioned my role in furthering closer Afghanistan-Philippines education cooperation. So thank you very much, sir, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. First Secretary, and for sharing some very interesting insights around the ways in which India and Philippines have the potential and scope for further collaboration, and how, I thought very interestingly, people-to-people movement, exchange and collaboration is, as I think increasingly happens, is moving at a faster pace perhaps than government signs MOUs and that sort of thing. People these days feel less and less the need to wait for those things to happen. And where there are natural affinities, then they lead to natural collaboration. Throughout the presentations that we've had, certain things have struck me, that we are talking about countries that all have certain things in common. I think high economic growth, strong desire for peace and stability, and, if I can say as probably the only European in the room, high work ethic. And whether that be amongst the students or the adults, quite frankly, you're a lot less lazy than we are. And that's completely politically incorrect, of course, for me to say it, but I can personally say that the time when I chose to move from Europe to South Asia was a time when the government in my own country and the governments of Europe were discussing such earth-shattering things as the maximum working week. And of course, the longer I spend time in this part of the world, the longer I realize that such a debate will perhaps never figure on the agenda within any of the countries represented around the table here today. Because a desire to tell people that they must restrain their personal aspiration, their aspiration as individuals, their aspiration for their families, their aspiration to better their lives, doesn't figure really within the DNA, I think, of any of the countries represented here. And to me, as someone who chose to live in this part of the world, I say that's a good thing. So now I think it would be a pleasure to hand the floor over to questions for our panelists. Yes, sir.
My name is Ashan. I'm at IIT Gandhinagar, and we are one of the newer IITs. And one of the ways that we have chosen to be distinctive in what we do is to focus on internationalization and globalization of our curriculum. And one, it has been through a couple of statistics to kind of reflect that 15% of our faculty at any given time are visiting faculty, most of them from abroad. A third of our students end up on study abroad program, from state to university. But almost exclusively, the nature of this is in the US and Europe. And so I'm very interested in a sense, looking at avenues that are outside those areas, which tend to be the traditional areas for these areas of exchange. And as it happens, I have actually spent time in Terengganu and Bali and Manila actually doing training programs almost a couple of decades ago. So I have a couple of questions for you folks, because you are in the embassies. One, what kind of support can the embassies provide to institutions that are looking to explore exchange programs, faculty, student exchanges, research exchanges? And second, who are the appropriate contacts? I know in your case, you have already told us, these two gentlemen, but at your other two places, who would be the individual with whom we could interact to explore potentials? So I'm looking for very practical ways of now moving on this.
Yes. I'll try to give a very short answer also. First of all, of course, the main task of our mission here, our mission as embassies here in Delhi is, of course, most of all, is to facilitate whatever endeavors are being done by our two countries. Whatever cooperation are being done by our two countries. So that is our task here. Now, such facilitation could be in various forms. It could be from simply handing an information booklet until maybe working together in, for instance, trying to really have an agreement with a certain institution there in Indonesia, with an institution here in India, and then also exploring the possibilities. What are the possibilities of this institution here in Indonesia working together with institution in India? Now, the interest or the initiative might come from both sides, be it from Indonesia. Some institutions, some education institutions in Indonesia might ask us to really have them establish contact with India, or the other way around, as I assume this is where you're going to really find contact with the Indonesian education institution. So this is where we are. Of course, as I mentioned, with the arrival of our educational attaché, the task is not as simple as we need to do more than just facilitate, you see. But then again, it has to be in the realms of education, because he's the expert in education in Indonesia, so he knows, the how to and what's the do's and the don'ts in having an established contact with Indonesia. So he's your man, and I would imagine my colleagues here would have the same answer, or maybe they would direct you to the capital.
Well, thank you. This was, I'm very happy that we are here today discussing an issue that is my embassy's very high priority. And I'm glad to introduce our Education Department Chief, Professor Rashid, who was the first secretary at the same time leading our Education Department in the embassy. A huge responsibility, and he has a very rich background in India as well. A professor at JNU, he has been there for 14 years, and we're happy to have someone who is very familiar in India in terms of his relationship, and I'm glad that this can be further expanded through new contacts that can be built between you and other institutions with our Education Department. We have a huge potential in Afghanistan with regard to university collaboration. As I said in my speech, we have over 100 public and private universities. There's one thing which hurts us a lot, is that the good things that are happening in Afghanistan are not reflected in the media outside. You always hear about bombs, you always hear about killings, but unfortunately that is a reality in some sense. But alongside the bad news that we have, we are seeing remarkable things happening in Afghanistan. So I wouldn't go to other things, but education is the backbone of any society, as I said earlier. And we would like to collaborate with all institutions. As I said earlier, my top priority in my embassy, though I have to deal with many issues, but to me, given the importance of education, given the outcome of education that will flourish in a society like ours, there is nothing more important to me than dealing with education issues. We have over 7,000 students across India. I'm glad a friend from Philippines mentioned the desire for collaboration, very much so. We are happy to engage regionally with countries in terms of education collaboration. Our students are across the world. But I have to tell you with confidence that the students who come from this region back to their country are doing much better, because that is a very conducive environment for people to be interacting knowledge-wise. So our embassy, as you said earlier, what they can do, yes, absolutely, I see a huge potential. I've been in touch with some universities, been visiting states like Hyderabad and Pune, and be traveling to other states as well. You are most welcome to engage with us for a much extensive relationship. Afghanistan was in universities today. Out of a population of less than 30 million, we are sending now 10.5 million children going to school. This is going to be a revolution in just a couple of years. Out of our population, 75% of the population is below the age of 25. So that is the kind of population that we are. We're very optimistic, but we must do more. How we can educate our population, even though they are under attack, as I said, unfortunately. We should know that the enemies of prosperity for humanity knows what hurts them, and they're hurt by education. And that's why they have chosen to attack education, and we must not surrender. Our people, I will tell you a very shocking story. Before becoming ambassador, I was dealing with security issues, and I was deputy NSA in Kabul. I would interact with people and ask them about their life and their education for children. I met an old guy one day and asked him, living in a very remote area, far near the border. I asked him if his children were going to school. He said, yes. I was shocked. I said, because we see in that particular area every day a bomb blast, this and that. I said, how come you dare sending your children to school? He said, we have learned, and I don't want my son to be the way I am, because he was illiterate. And therefore, if we have 7,000 this year, we'll probably have thousands more next year. They're all coming, and we would like to put them in various institutions across India and elsewhere, in Philippines and Bangladesh and many other countries we are sending them. Malaysia, and that's a little far, but I'm always saying that I don't want our children or students to go far away from here, which is good to send them wherever. There is an old saying that the Prophet Mohammad saying that even you go to China for education. So the farthest point they can go for education, it's worth going. But if we can go to India easily for education, I would go far. So we are ready to come to this country more than countries away. But I would like to see that happening through arrangement, because New Year is coming, new admissions are coming. We are sending our children for languages first and then going to majors later. So I think we can do a lot more between the two of us. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for your question. We diplomats wear many hats. So I'm the first secretary and consul general. So in my capacity as consul general, I approve the visas for the student visas from India to the Philippines. My deputy ambassador, Minister Cervantes, she also handles education, the education portfolio in the embassy. So that's basically us. Unfortunately, we don't have an education attaché, Excellency, but maybe in the near future. The other question on SARC ASEAN cooperation, I'm not an expert, but I think the institution building has to be stepped up, because I know there is a committee in the UN General Assembly in New York wherein ASEAN and SARC have a joint committee and they have regular meetings. But beyond that, I'm not sure if there's been flesh put to the bone in this respect. So I assure you, Excellency, that when I go back to Manila, I will continue my advocacy of closer SARC-ASEAN relations. What was your other question?
But yeah, no, just what kind of support the...
Oh yeah, we open doors. Basically, we are connectors. To repeat what our two distinguished speakers said, we connect people. So there, for example, there is a huge university in Pune that is sending dozens of students to the Philippines. So that started out in a very simple conversation. You know, that's we connect people and we open doors that ordinary citizens may have difficulty sometimes achieving in our capacity. Thank you.
Can you just share what are the numbers for Indian students going to the Philippines and Philippine students coming to India?
Right now, the Filipino students in India are in the low hundreds. But as I said, 500 student pilots are from India. So you can imagine how many medical students are now coming to the Philippines from India. Close to that number. I can give you the exact number later. Thank you.
So there is a question from my side. Actually, I represent a company which is dealing with African as a continent. And there, every time Africa again has got the same requirement that we should have the quality education, something related to women empowerment, and then the entrepreneurship. So we are the organization which has built up a base and giving them the projects and submitting it to the ambassador, which has been liked and approved, and the government is considering. But in other part of the region, since they approached us directly, so it was very easy for us to give them the services. So our kind of organization, this is looking up to share our expertise with the other countries. What kind of support can the ambassador can give us while entering up, showing us our quality and the profile which we have, so that the government there can consider whether they are interested for this kind of collaboration or this kind of projects and proposals to be sent across. So is there any way out? Because as you rightly said that there is the education minister, people there who are representing, but then in few of the countries there is no such person. So we get...
If they go directly, then sometimes there's a problem, and then only is the embassy involved.
No,
if there's a problem.
I think I didn't make my question clear. My question is that every country is talking about sharing up ideas of the quality education, then sometime about the women empowerment, sometime about opening up the vocational center, which can in turn provide the immediate employability. Here is, I represent a company which is doing the similar task. Which is bringing up the projects, submitting it to the ministries of different countries, and channelizing the process as to what they should do to bring their country up on the education platform. So what I'm saying is there are few countries where, while I was just going through, I was not getting a headway. That how should I move? How should I project my company into it? As Sir rightly said, that exchanging up the college-to-college relationship is easy. University-to-university interface is easy. But it's very difficult for a private organization like us, who's doing and dealing with one country, to extend our services to other countries, where the country may be looking up for that kind of expertise. The country may have got that interest that somebody from India should explore that opportunity, that how should we become, better in education.
I just wonder whether, although you're not a university yourselves, whether collaboration with universities in the overseas countries would then lead to those universities looking to invite you. And so then the university would ask their government to facilitate that.
Actually, the government at times, they are bringing up projects like, I mean, the project which was being discussed and shared here with Indonesia, they say that we want to bring in, you know, some kind of unique centers, schools of excellence, vocational centers.
So you're looking at where the funding is going to come from government. Yeah.
So the government, if they are opening up some kind of project and they seek on the expertise advice, that there should be an advice from the country which is already there on the similar platform. So if there is an organization which is doing this kind of job, how to do those organizations can enter into the country? Is there the ambassador who will be helping us to get into it, to pass on our project, or maybe our extending up our services? Ambassador, because we cannot channelize ourselves directly to the government. So it's a channeler.
Yes, usually, if, for instance, we bring from India, here,
Ambassador.
of course, the embassy has many officers there, my there. If I'm able and available, by all means.
One second. Okay, thank you. Before I just take your question, I wanted to just quickly take the opportunity. We've been joined by the Minister, Plenipotentiary, Republic of Slovenia, Lieutenant Boris Jelovšek. Welcome, sir. And the Minister is also here to join in the discussions. Sorry, your question.
In Bali, there is green school. I am inspired of that school, and I opened green school in Gujarat in the year of 2009 on the basis of Bali model. And basis on that model, we achieved success. And basis on that my model in Gujarat, the government of Gujarat is opening 70 new green schools. 70 from this year. So we have always looking for collaboration, this and for student exchange, teacher exchange, but we could not get the way out. So if students, the is there, how can you help us to student exchange and teachers exchange?
Well, yes, I think the best way to do it is, of course, get in touch with us.
Yes.
You know, because how, you know, if we don't meet, we don't speak, and how would we know, right? And all I can say that is, you know, such collaboration being our task to facilitate, of course, we will do our best to see to it that, you know, this would really manifest further. But, of course, there's also no guarantee. We also have to see on the interest of your potential counterpart there in our country, right? So that is also to be of course, in some instances
in
there are.
In the area, I'm sure that the Bali model will be the better for India to create the climate change issues. I'm working on that now. Sustainability through education.
Any further questions? Yes, please, sir.
Based on my experience with the Indian education system, there is two streams of education. One is supported by government, the other from private sectors. I'm sure in India the government and state education system is very powerful, very strong than the private. For this reason, still in the past 10 years, even some private institutions, they were not able to improve themselves. Even they have not reached to the level of those universities like Delhi DO, for example, BHU in Pune, some institution. And first of all, we must, and especially the private sector, must improve their educational curriculum. That is my suggestion. And secondly, they are not spending sometimes on the scholars, for example. The teaching system is very weak. It is copy of the governmental systems. Most of the scholars who are working in the private sector, they are the retired scholar of the government. For this reason, I think we must governmental system has. Secondly, my suggestion, as His Excellency also put pressure on that, it will be better we have an experience of the SARC University. As my friend from Philippines and His Excellency from Indonesia also mentioned, we must start some. That will be a better way to start a joint educational system, a joint universities in different part and fields. And for example, for computer science, for economic growth in other side, for cultural relation, for cultural fields of this kind of university we need. We have the experience of the SARC University. That is a good achievement of the countries, these countries. For this reason, this is one of the point. If we are able to continue to start some efforts, that will be better. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
I guess just one question which I think is applicable to perhaps a couple of these countries, and I guess you as well. In terms of these exchanges, one of the constraints is obviously language. And I would imagine in the case of Malaysia and Slovenia, are there enough English language institutions, and should they be the focus of these exchanges, or how are language issues engaged, in potential exchanges?
That's an important question. I think language is an issue. Based on the last 5 years, we have brought some changes to the system of sending students abroad. Though we have some good institutions in Afghanistan, across Afghanistan, where language is taught, but not up to the standard which is required for postgraduate or graduate students to have. From this year, in fact, from last year, we have begun a new system for our students to come at least 5 or 6 months before universities are started in India, so that they can qualify the required language skills before they go and select their majors. That is giving a good result. Before that, this was an issue where they would come and they would struggle in classes. But now students must come 5 or 6 months before they go to universities, and some of the major they're selecting, they're given in accordance with the major they're selecting. If they go to engineering, of course, language is not the same for all majors. You have to learn, technically, exactly the subject-oriented language before you go, and that is, I think, a better solution that we have found based on our experience, and this is what we are going to do more from now on. We have now 400 students preparing now for this year universities now in various education, the language institutions, and we're going to send more from now on.
Hearing that answer, it crossed my mind that I'm aware that the IITs, even themselves here in India, have had issues with students, for example, who are coming even from within India with language issues, and that the IITs have been looking at their own responses to that. Students, for example, who've come through from certain states in the country where the English language is weaker, and they're hot-housed through to be able to get their admissions into IIT. But when they arrive, they have certain shortcomings around language issues. And my understanding was that many of the IITs are looking at their own solutions for that, which might well dovetail with meeting some of those needs as well of students who are arriving from overseas?
Yeah, well, actually, we are starting a writing center at IIT Gandhinagar, which will probably be the first writing center, I think, in India, which is very common in US and UK universities, actually. But no, I was thinking more in terms of even at the institutional level. The fact is that most of the universities in Indonesia would not have English language instruction, and I suppose that's true at your place too. And so when we are looking at faculty exchanges or short-term student exchanges, not people who are coming here to get their whole degree. In fact, 70% of student exchanges are really around single semester or less kind of thing. And that's what we think is a lot of potential in terms of these exchanges. And there the constraint becomes language, oftentimes. So are there institutions in Malaysia, for instance, that are Indonesia, that have more English language instruction or significant English language instruction in the classroom?
Well, that's relative, I would say. But, well, in general terms, English is being taught in middle school. Now, before, some few decades ago, we didn't learn English language until we were in the 7th, 8th grade. Now, they're being taught as 3rd, 4th grade. So, more and more of our younger generation are more proficient in English, and even there are schools, Indonesian schools, for that matter, with some element of international there, which gives special focus also on the English language, and enabling the graduate to really use English as working or not simply as a market language, but as a working language or a studying language for that matter, which can, of course, be measured by, for instance, TOEFL or the IELTS, LTS. But it's not really prevailing. It has just started some 10, 15 years ago. So it really hasn't, blossomed as we would like to see. But on the whole, I would say that we're doing pretty well, Indonesia, considering that we didn't have any engagement in the past with Britain. We are not an English-speaking country, and matter of fact, we were under the Dutch colonization for several hundred years, and yet we don't also learn the Dutch language.
Good for you.
That's political. That's our political path. But anyway, yes, to be honest, in the past, Indonesians are not really that gifted in language, in the foreign language. However, now situation, we are beginning to realize that, and more efforts are being taken by, all stakeholders, be it from private as well as from the government, to really see to it that students are more empowered, especially in language, not only English. There's Chinese, there's Arabic, there is also Japanese as well. So Spanish, French, things like that. So now the need, the realization is already there, and more people, more and more of our younger generation have this ability to converse, communicate in the English language.
Just to complete what what you are seeking, just for your information, we are also adapting to the new reality, which is the need for English medium. That's the reality of the 21st century. Afghanistan used to have various mediums. We were teaching French and German in the 70s and 60s, and now we have begun adapting. We have this year begun teaching engineering and medical taught in English, and that's why we're also taking some lecturers from India and others, at least to start the foundation. At the same time, we have one subject in each class, English, but the medium is not English right now. But we are moving towards adapting, transforming our education system. From this year, we began with 2 universities, medical and engineering. Both of them are being taught in English language. So this is a new reality, and we'll adapt. I think we need to adapt ourselves to this new reality. Thank you.
I would like to say also about the language. Of course, Slovenia is the small country with the language of instruction in Slovenian language. But already in the time of Yugoslavia, that means 22 years ago, we had a lot of students from all over the world, especially for third countries, from non-alignment countries. And these students which came, they had to learn Slovenian before they went to the graduate school. Now, after the independence or after split of Yugoslavia, Slovenia is part of European Union. And as European Union, we are approaching also to Erasmus Mundus. And that means that we are cooperating more and more with international students in the short programs of 6 months or 9 months, but we have also some courses only in English, especially at Faculty of Economics. We have a special Bologna process in a special program of 3 years in marketing program. Additionally, of course, regarding Erasmus program, we have to prepare for some courses or this semester for which students are coming, that they can also learn in English. So that is specially then prepared for them, special additional program for English-speaking students or international students who are using this so-called international language, which is not. We must say it's not, but obviously it's more and more coming there. So
we are stuck with it.
yes, but I would like to mention also one international organization which was established at the time of Yugoslavia and is now in Slovenia. It is International Center for Public Enterprise. There are master programs only in English, and are also mentioned for the countries which are developing countries. This International Center for Public Enterprises has a long, more than 20 years long practice for education in English language. The main supporters are Slovenia as host country and India. The second partner in ICPE, that International Center for Public Enterprise, is exactly India. And we had and have a lot of students from India. So the program will begin also this year in October, and we expect that at least 25 or more students will be enrolled. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have a vote for conclusion from the floor there. So with that, on behalf of everybody here, my thanks and appreciation to all of the speakers today. His Excellency the Ambassador of Indonesia to India, His Excellency the Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and the First Secretary, Embassy Philippines. And thank you also for joining us, Minister Plenipotentiary of Republic of Slovenia. Thank you all. I think a very interesting fascinating discussion, and I think one that leaves everybody going away with a lot of things to follow up on, I suspect, and a lot of contacts to be reinforced, cemented, and may it all lead to even more international cooperation, because, as we said at the beginning, the more international cooperation, the more the likelihood for peace, for harmony in the world, and that people get to live their lives with all of the aspiration that they have to better their lives and to better the society. So thank you very, very much.
I would like to request you all, kindly please come forward. We would like to give you appreciation of thanks